The mail-order rifle they mocked killed 13 Japanese snipers in 5 days. The recruits at Camp Elliott were finishing another training cycle when the delivery truck rolled up to the administrative tent. It was late afternoon, the sun sharp and low, the heat still radiating from the hard-packed ground. Most of the men were sitting on their cots, boots half-laced, uniforms unbuttoned at the top after hours of drills. They had spent the day running obstacle courses, practicing rifle marksmanship, and learning how to move through terrain they had never seen before. Private Elias Turner sat near the back of the barracks, cleaning an M1 Garand with a level of precision the others rarely bothered with. He was 19, from rural Montana, the oldest son of a cattle rancher. He had grown up working before sunrise, walking fence lines, fixing equipment, and hunting to help feed the family when money was tight. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. In fact, most assumed he simply preferred quiet. But the instructors had already taken note of his steadiness. He learned quickly, didn't complain, and shot accurately. Turner was joined in training by two men who would later serve with him in the Pacific. Private Tom Wilkes, a former streetcar mechanic from Chicago, was loud, confident, and always ready with a joke. Sergeant Jack Moran, 10 years older than the rest, had re-enlisted after Pearl Harbor. He served in the 1930s, returned to civilian life, and then put his uniform back on when the war began. Moran wasn't sentimental. He trained men to survive, and he didn't waste time on anything he considered unnecessary. When the door opened and the corporal carrying the mail list shouted Turner's name, the barracks turned to look. The package was long, thin, and wrapped in plain brown paper. Several of the men already started smiling. Wilkes grinned. Looks like Turner ordered himself something fancy. Moran watched from his bunk, but didn't comment. The sergeant had seen every sort of nonsense come through training camps. Turner set the package on the floor and untied the twine. He peeled back the wrapping, revealing a cardboard shipping box lined with crumpled newspaper. Inside, protected by a canvas sleeve, was a brand new Winchester Model 70 sporting rifle, fitted with a simple 4-power scope. The reaction was immediate. "You've got to be joking," one recruit said. "A hunting rifle?" another added. "For what? Deer season in Tokyo." Turner ignored them. He pulled the rifle free and checked it with deliberate movements. He worked the bolt, inspected the breech, and made sure the scope mounts were tight. Everything was clean and factory fresh. Moran finally spoke. "Turner, what exactly do you think you'll do with that out there?" Turner didn't look up. "It's accurate," he answered. "I shoot better with it." That was the truth. On the ranch, his father let him practice with an old bolt-action rifle from the 1920s. The Model 70 felt natural in his hands, steady, predictable, familiar in a way the M1 wasn't yet. The laughter continued, but it wasn't cruel. It was the laughter that came from boredom, nerves, and a strange mixture of youth and fear that hung over every training camp in 1942. Most of the recruits had never been in combat. Many had never left their home state before the draft. The jokes helped keep the anxiety down. Wilkes leaned against Turner's bunk. "Look, I'm sure it's a good rifle," he said, "but the Marines give us guns for a reason." Turner responded evenly. "This one works for me." A few of the men exchanged looks, half amused, half dismissive. A privately purchased hunting rifle didn't fit the image of a soldier preparing for jungle warfare. It wasn't military issue. It didn't have an 8-round clip. It required deliberate, manual cycling. To most of them, it looked like a step backward. 2 days later, during voluntary range practice, Turner carried the Winchester to the firing line. The other recruits took their Garands and carbines. The range instructor raised an eyebrow when he saw the sporting rifle, but didn't object. Privately owned firearms were allowed if the soldier also carried his issued weapon. The targets were set at various distances: 100, 200, and 300 yards. The sun was harsh, wind low, conditions ideal for testing both man and rifle. Turner fired slowly. One shot, reset, another shot. No rushed movements, no wasted breath. The steel targets responded with sharp metallic impacts, one after another. The instructor nodded. Consistent. Clean. Good grouping. The recruits behind him stopped talking. Wilkes whispered, "Well, I'll be damned." Even Moran, usually critical of everything, watched with a more thoughtful expression. He didn't compliment Turner, but he didn't need to. The accuracy spoke clearly. Still, the rifle remained a curiosity, a joke in some eyes, a pointless extra item in others. And nothing about that day suggested that this simple hunting rifle would soon determine who lived and who died on a jungle ridge nearly 7,000 miles away. For now, it was just a mail-order gun in a training camp. Mocked, dismissed, unimportant. But its time would come. When the 182nd Infantry Regiment landed on Bougainville in early 1944, most of the men had never experienced a place like it. The island was thick with vegetation from the shoreline to the interior mountains. The air felt heavy, carrying the smell of wet soil, rotting leaves, and fuel from the supply barges that came and went at odd hours. Nothing stayed dry. Boots filled with water, uniforms clung to the skin, rifles needed constant attention. Private Elias Turner stepped off the landing craft with the other men of Company F. By then he had served on Guadalcanal, earned the trust of Sergeant Moran, and developed a close friendship with Private Wilkes. The three formed a small team within the platoon. Turner the quiet marksman, Wilkes the talkative mechanic-turned-infantryman, and Moran the veteran who kept them alive. Their assignment on Bougainville was straightforward on paper: hold a section of perimeter, conduct patrols, and push Japanese forces deeper into the interior so engineers could expand the American airfields. In reality, none of the tasks were straightforward. Every trail had to be cleared, every water source monitored. Every movement outside the wire came with a level of risk that was hard to explain to men who had never fought in jungle terrain. The Japanese defenders had withdrawn into the thick interior. They were not retreating, they were reorganizing. Small units remained behind to harass American patrols. Some were snipers, trained, disciplined, and experienced. Their rifles blended into the environment, and their firing positions were nearly impossible to locate until it was too late. Within the first days on the island, the Americans learned this the hard way. On a humid morning near a section known as the Laruma River Line, a supply detail carried crates of rations from a landing point toward the company's makeshift kitchen area. The group moved casually, unaware that a Japanese sniper had been watching that trail for hours. The shot came without warning. One man fell instantly, hit in the chest. The rest scattered behind tree trunks, unsure where the shot had come from. By the time a medic reached the fallen soldier, the sniper was already gone. Later that afternoon, the company found the firing position, a concealed nest in a thick banyan tree, 40 feet up. The sniper could have remained undetected indefinitely if he hadn't decided to engage. Sergeant Moran called the squad together that evening. "This is not the open fields of the States," he said. "You don't walk upright unless you have to. You move slow. You watch the branches, not the ground." Turner listened carefully, noting how the sergeant emphasized angles, cover, and concealment. Turner's experience hunting in Montana had taught him patience and observation, but this environment was different. The animals here were silent when humans approached. The ground was uneven. The brush didn't move unless touched. The slightest piece of metal could betray a sniper's position. Turner stored every detail away. 2 days later, the platoon was assigned to patrol a section of elevated terrain the men in the regiment had begun calling Dead Man's Spine, a narrow ridge with steep drops on both sides. Several units had taken casualties there. A forward observation team lost 2 men. A communications runner was shot while attempting to repair a line. A machine gunner was hit while repositioning during a minor skirmish. The pattern was consistent. One shot, no follow-up, no visible movement. It was clear that multiple snipers were operating along that stretch. Turner, Wilkes, and Moran were part of a patrol sent to assess the terrain and identify potential firing lanes used by the Japanese. As they moved up the ridge, Wilkes muttered quietly, "Feels like someone's staring at us." Moran responded without turning, "They probably are." Turner scanned the trees. He didn't see anything obvious, but he noted details: a branch that looked too cleanly broken, a patch of soil that seemed more compacted than the rest, a vine that hung at an unnatural angle. None of these meant anything on their own, but together they suggested movement within the past day. At the ridge's midpoint, the patrol paused. The humidity made breathing feel laborious. Turner wiped sweat from his eyes and gripped his standard issue M1 Garand. The Winchester stayed strapped to his pack. He was still reluctant to bring it on routine patrols. The jokes from training camp had never fully faded from memory. A sudden gunshot interrupted the quiet. It came from their right flank. Sharp, fast, unmistakable. A bullet struck a tree trunk inches from a corporal's head, showering him with bark shards. The entire patrol dropped to the ground. "Sniper!" someone shouted. The men crawled toward the nearest cover. Turner pressed himself behind a fallen log, scanning for any movement. He found none. The sniper had chosen a location where he could fire and then pull back into deeper vegetation. After 10 tense minutes, Moran made the call to withdraw. No clear position. No point getting pinned down. The patrol retreated in a low crouch, moving slowly to avoid drawing attention. No additional shots followed. The sniper had completed his task: disrupt movement, inflict fear, and waste American time. Back at the company area, Turner sat on his bunk, thinking. He had dealt with concealed animals before: wolves in tall grass, deer hidden in brush. But this was different. The Japanese snipers were not acting on instinct. They were trained to anticipate reactions, to exploit hesitation, to break the rhythm of American operations. Wilkes dropped onto the cot beside him. "You think there's more than one up there?" he asked. "3, maybe 4, Turner said. "What makes you say that?" "They're hitting different angles. Shots aren't coming from the same height. Distances are inconsistent." Moran walked over. "You got something in mind, Turner?" Turner hesitated. Then he said it. "Next time we go up there, I want to bring the Winchester." Wilkes blinked, surprised. "That thing?" "The Sears rifle." Turner nodded. "I can place shots better with it." Moran didn't respond immediately. He studied Turner's expression, considering it. "You know what you're doing with that rifle," the sergeant finally said. "If it gives you an edge, bring it." The decision marked a turning point, quiet, unnoticed by most, but significant. The mail-order rifle that had once been a punchline was about to enter a battlefield ruled by camouflage, patience, and deadly precision. And on Dead Man's Spine, the enemy was already waiting. The rain started on the night before the operation. A steady, unbroken downpour that soaked through tents, clogged drainage ditches, and turned walkways into stretches of mud. For most of Company F, it meant another uncomfortable night. For Turner, it meant something else. The jungle's natural sound masking would make sniper detection harder, but it would also allow him to move more quietly. At dawn on March 3rd, 1944, the platoon assembled near the forward trench line running along the Larimer River. Their objective was simple: push north along the ridge, mark viable positions for machine gun teams, and identify Japanese sniper nests. Battalion command needed accurate information before they set up permanent observation posts in the area. Sergeant Moran briefed the squad. "We move slow, single file until the trail widens. Turner, you and Wilkes take the rear. Eyes open." Turner rested his Winchester across his chest. He had cleaned it twice the night before, making sure the barrel was clear and the trigger pull stayed smooth despite the humidity. He carried his Garand as well, slung on his back, but the Winchester was the rifle he intended to rely on. The climb toward the ridge took nearly an hour. Mud clung to their boots. Insects hovered around their faces. The thick canopy filtered the morning light into weak greenish patches. At intervals, the men paused, listening to nothing but rain tapping against leaves. When they reached a narrow plateau, Moran raised his fist. The squad halted. "Same area we got pinned 2 days ago," Wilkes whispered. Turner nodded. He recognized a tree marked by a bullet scar. The angle still bothered him. The shot had come from higher ground, but not directly above. The sniper had likely used a partially hollowed tree trunk or a platform built into the branches. He had seen similar constructions on Guadalcanal. They advanced 20 more steps. A gunshot cracked from the left. The round struck the ground inches in front of Private Delgado, spraying mud across his uniform. The men dropped instantly. Another shot followed, this one aimed at the medic who had taken cover behind a rock. Moran shouted, "Positions! Find cover and hold." The squad spread out, hugging the ground. Turner slid behind the base of a thick tree, controlling his breathing. He scanned upward, the branches, the gaps between trunks, the shaded pockets where a rifle barrel might be hiding. Somewhere above and ahead, the sniper waited. Turner didn't speak. He adjusted the Winchester, pressed his cheek to the worn wooden stock, and scanned again. The rain created a faint haze, but it also added subtle movement to leaves, movement he could use as a reference. Then he noticed it, a small spot where the rain hit something solid before dropping downward. The shape didn't match the tree bark. It was too smooth. It sat slightly forward, like a piece of metal tucked behind foliage. Turner exhaled slowly and fired one controlled shot. The Winchester's report was noticeably quieter than the Garand's. A body dropped from the branches above, falling roughly 15 feet before hitting the ground with a dull thud. Moran glanced at Turner. "You got him." Turner nodded. "One." The squad waited another minute before advancing. They found the dead sniper lying twisted in the mud. His rifle was wrapped in strips of cloth to reduce reflection. His uniform was soaked. He had carried a small pack containing 2 magazines, rice, and a folded map showing firing angles toward the American perimeter. Wilkes looked at Turner. "You spotted that through this rain?" "It was the water hitting his rifle," Turner said. "Didn't match the rest." The patrol continued up the ridge. The air grew thicker, the terrain narrower. By midday, they reached a stretch with deep ravines on both sides. Moran ordered a halt to check a potential observation point. As Turner knelt to examine a ridgeline ahead, a second shot tore through the air. The crack echoed differently, sharper, suggesting a longer barrel. The bullet hit the dirt less than a meter from Moran's foot. "Another one," someone shouted. Turner dropped flat and rolled behind a fallen log. This sniper was farther away, maybe 120 meters, and well concealed. The shot had come from the right, across a narrow ravine. Wilkes whispered, "You see anything?" Turner didn't answer. He scanned the tree line through the thin mist. No movement, no reflection, no irregularities. He needed to force the sniper to reveal something. Turner picked up a loose helmet someone had dropped and nudged it slightly above the log using a stick. A round hit the helmet instantly, punching through one side and out the other. The sound of the shot confirmed the sniper's general position. Turner angled himself low, found a gap between 2 branches, and stayed motionless. He watched for the smallest sign, an elbow repositioning, a branch shifting unnaturally against the wind, a muzzle clearing a leaf. Then he saw it, a faint shift in coloration where the sniper had cut a firing slit into a palm frond screen. The slit was so narrow it looked like a natural vein in the leaf. Turner aimed deliberately. He squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked lightly. A brief shout followed. Leaves shook. Then a body tumbled partway down the slope on the far side of the ravine. Moran signaled the squad to stay down. They waited for another shot. None came. "That's 2," Wilkes said quietly. Turner didn't respond. His focus stayed on the opposite slope for another minute before he finally lowered the rifle. They pushed forward again. On the 3rd day, they encountered 2 more snipers. One pinned the platoon for nearly an hour before Turner found his position inside a hollow tree. Another used a camouflaged pit dug into the hillside. Turner eliminated both, each shot measured and precise. By the 4th day, morale in the platoon had changed. The men stayed alert, but not paralyzed. They trusted Turner's skill. Moran even reassigned one assistant gunner to remain near Turner as a spotter. The ridge began to feel navigable again. On the 5th day, just after noon, a sniper fired from an angle none of them expected. Nearly vertical from a branch cluster above a narrow path they had used frequently. The first shot hit a sapper in the shoulder. The second struck the dirt near the radio operator. Turner moved without hesitation. He slid behind a thick root system and angled the Winchester upward. The sniper was almost invisible, pressed against the trunk, using a natural knot for stability. Turner waited for a slight shift in weight, barely perceptible, then fired. The sniper fell straight down, landing less than 20 feet from the squad. With that final shot, Turner had eliminated 13 snipers in 5 days. The ridge fell silent, except for the steady rain and the distant rumble of artillery far to the west. Moran approached Turner as the squad regrouped. "Command will want a full report," he said. "But you did more than that. You gave us this ridge back." Turner nodded, wiping water and mud from the Winchester's stock. It was the only way through. The Winchester hung in his hands, stained, soaked, scratched from brush, but perfectly functional. The same rifle some men had laughed at months earlier now felt like an essential tool, as reliable as any military-issued weapon in the company. And the ridge, once considered a death trap, was finally under American control. Word of Turner's 5-day streak traveled through the company faster than official reports ever did. In infantry units, information moved by proximity between foxholes, along supply lines, in the short moments when men gathered for water or ammunition. By the time the platoon returned to the main perimeter, everyone had heard a version of the story. Some said he got 4 snipers in a single day. Others claimed he hit one from more than 200 meters through heavy rain. None of the details were exact, but one part stayed consistent. He did it with a rifle that wasn't standard issue. When Turner and the squad reached the company area, a few men approached out of curiosity. They weren't looking for celebration. They wanted to see the rifle. Turner sat on an ammunition crate, disassembling the Winchester to check for moisture inside the receiver. Private Collins leaned in. "That's the one. Looks light." "It is," Turner said. "Chamber's smaller, too." Collins examined it with interest. "You got more kills with that than half of us do with Garand's." Turner didn't reply. He kept working, careful not to damage the thin wooden stock. The rifle was never meant for months in a tropical environment. But despite its limitations, it had done everything he needed. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Harris arrived. He rarely visited enlisted areas unless necessary. The men straightened reflexively. "At ease," Harris said, then looked directly at Turner. "Sergeant Moran briefed me on what happened up there." "Nice work." Turner nodded once. He wasn't comfortable with praise. Harris continued, glancing at the rifle. "Battalion wants a written account. They're impressed." His tone carried a hint of skepticism. "And they're asking how a civilian hunting rifle ended up in the field." Turner answered calmly. "I mailed for it before Guadalcanal. It came through logistics with the rest of my personal gear." Harris exhaled through his nose, unsure whether to approve or reprimand. "Just keep it documented. Higher command likes paperwork." After Harris left, Wilkes sat down beside Turner. "You think they'll take it from you?" Wilkes asked. "They can if they want," Turner said. "It belongs to the Army as long as I'm here." Wilkes tapped the wooden stock lightly. "Well, if they do, they'd better give you something that could do the same job." Turner didn't comment, but he'd already thought about this. The Army had sharpshooter rifles available, but distribution was inconsistent. Some regiments received Springfield M1903A4 rifles. Others didn't. Even when they arrived, optics fogged easily in the jungle, and many sharpshooters returned to iron sights. The Winchester's iron sights, familiar and simple, never fogged. That evening, the platoon gathered for a quick meal. The sky grew darker as another rainstorm approached. Men talked casually about rations, mail, and the new rotation schedule for patrols. Then Sergeant Moran called for Turner and Wilkes to follow him to the command tent. Inside, a small group of officers stood around a folding table covered with terrain sketches. Lieutenant Harris nodded at Turner. "We're expanding the perimeter north. Engineers will build a temporary observation post on that ridge you cleared. But we need continued overwatch until the position is stable." Harris pointed at a marked area. "This is where you'll be stationed. 2-man team, rotating shifts, eyes open." Turner studied the map. The observation post overlooked 2 major approach routes the Japanese had used in recent weeks. The elevation gave a clear view, but it also exposed the observer to counter-sniper fire. Moran added, "You won't be up there all day, just at dawn and late afternoon. Those are the hours snipers favor." Wilkes lifted an eyebrow. "Us too. Turner needs someone who's worked with him before," Moran said. "And you can spot." Turner didn't argue. He accepted the assignment. It was straightforward, and he preferred predictable tasks over chaotic patrols. The next morning, Turner and Wilkes hiked toward the ridge with light gear, binoculars, entrenching tools, extra ammunition, and a field phone that connected back to headquarters via a long cable strung through the trees. When they reached the designated point, the engineers had already cleared a narrow depression in the ground. It was barely big enough for two men to sit without being seen. Turner lay prone and scanned the area. The landscape was quiet but not empty. Far below, vines hung from tree branches. Patches of ferns moved with every breeze. A distant ravine cut across the jungle floor like a shallow trench. The environment looked ordinary, but Turner knew this type of terrain allowed snipers to reposition without making sound. Wilkes asked, "You figure they'll send more snipers after losing 13? "They'll replace them," Turner said. "They always do." Turner studied the tree line again, focusing on potential high ground. Japanese snipers rarely returned to the same position after firing. They shifted constantly, relying on routes they memorized in advance. The hours passed slowly. The rain held off for most of the morning, but humidity made the air feel thick. Turner checked the Winchester again, making sure moisture hadn't crept into the action. The rifle was aging fast in the Pacific climate. Just before noon, Turner noticed movement, a small figure shifting briefly behind a fallen log about 150 meters away. He didn't fire. The movement wasn't deliberate or cautious enough for a sniper. It was likely a scout or a messenger, and firing without confirmation risked exposing their position. Wilkes whispered, "You saw something?" "Not a sniper," Turner said, "but they're close." The rest of the day remained uneventful. No shots, no activity, just the steady pressure of vigilance. Turner and Wilkes rotated shifts overnight, sleeping in short intervals. The jungle stayed noisy, but nothing approached. At dawn on the second morning, Turner scanned the tree line from the same angle as before. This time, the environment felt different. Bird calls sounded inconsistent. A branch that had hung straight the day before now angled slightly left. In a narrow shadow near the base of a tree, seemed thicker than natural growth would allow. Turner tightened his grip on the Winchester. Wilkes whispered, "You see him?" "Not yet," Turner replied, "but someone is there." The Japanese hadn't accepted the loss of the ridge. They were preparing to challenge it. And Turner understood the pattern well enough to know what would come next. An attempt to reclaim the ground, one hidden rifle at a time. The second morning on the ridge began with low visibility. A layer of mist hung between the trees, drifting slowly as the sun struggled to push through the canopy. Turner preferred clear air. Mist distorted depth and blended shadows. But he had learned long ago that conditions didn't adapt to the mission. Men adapted to the conditions. He lay prone behind the narrow concealment trench, the Winchester resting across a sandbag. Wilkes sat slightly behind him, binoculars raised. The field phone lay coiled beside them, its line running back through thick brush toward the company's communication shack. "Nothing yet," Wilkes whispered, scanning slowly. Turner didn't answer. He kept his eyes fixed on the darker patch of terrain he'd seen the day before, an area that looked ordinary but carried subtle inconsistencies. Snipers favored terrain that gave them escape routes, cover, and elevation. That spot offered all three. Minutes passed. Then Wilkes murmured, "Hold on, right side, near that broken palm." Turner adjusted his sight picture. A shape moved, not a full silhouette, just a deliberate shift in weight behind a low mound of roots. The movement was too controlled for an animal. Turner steadied his breathing. Distance. Wilkes checked. About 140. Turner made a small correction to his aim, angling slightly upward. The figure didn't rise. It remained low, scanning the area with the slow precision of someone trained to hide longer than he fought. Turner watched the terrain carefully. A faint glint flashed for half a second, metal contacting moisture. Turner fired. The report cracked through the air, short and contained. A second later, a body rolled from behind the mound and down a slight slope. The figure's hands clutched a Japanese Type 97 sniper rifle, its scope partially covered in cloth. Wilkes exhaled. That one was patient. "They're adjusting," Turner said. "They're sending more experienced ones." He didn't say the rest, but Wilkes understood. Removing 13 snipers was not just a defensive success, it was an escalation. And the Japanese were responding accordingly. By mid-morning, the ridge had remained quiet. Turner stayed alert. Snipers rarely operated alone in a retaliation effort. They positioned in pairs or small clusters, using staggered vantage points to track reactions. At noon, the temperature rose sharply. The mist finally lifted, exposing the deep jungle on both sides of the ridge. Turner wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, then lifted the Winchester slightly to recheck his field of fire. Wilkes shifted his weight. "How long you think we'll hold this spot?" "As long as engineers need it," Turner said. "And after?" "Then they move us somewhere else." Wilkes gave a small nod. Turner was not a man who speculated. It kept his thoughts organized and his attention on threats he could see. Just after 1 o'clock, a distant rustle caught Turner's ear. Not loud, but irregular. Movement was approaching from the northwest, too slow for a squad, too cautious for a patrol. Turner tapped Wilkes' arm. "Left tree line, 200 meters." Wilkes raised his binoculars. "I see foliage shifting. Could be wind." "Wind doesn't push from two directions at once," Turner replied. They watched in silence. Then, from the deeper shade, a slight reflection blinked. Turner stayed still. This sniper was farther than the others and well prepared. The Japanese likely positioned him to counter Turner specifically. If they lost too many men on the ridge, they would respond with someone who had been fighting since before the Americans landed. Turner did not fire. He watched. The sniper remained still, waiting for someone on the ridge to make a mistake, someone to adjust gear, lift a helmet, or lean into the open for a better look. Wilkes muttered, "He's good." Turner whispered, "He's watching for us to expose first." For nearly 5 minutes, neither side moved. Then Turner made a small calculation. If the sniper was waiting for any American movement, he would likely take the first opportunity to break the stalemate. Turner picked up a discarded ration tin, pressed it against a short stick, and slowly raised it an inch above the sandbag. A rifle crack sounded instantly. The tin jumped as the bullet punched through. Turner already had the Winchester angled toward where the shot originated. He fired the moment he saw the slight, leaf shift from recoil. His round hit exactly where he aimed. A faint grunt followed, then the sound of a body collapsing onto wet soil. Wilkes lowered his binoculars. "You got him. That was a clean angle." Turner nodded once. "That's 2 today." He remained cautious. Sniper units sometimes inserted a third marksman slightly behind the others. Patience was their most reliable method, but the terrain stayed still for the next hour. No movement, no glints, just the steady hum of insects and the distant rumble of artillery from the coastal perimeter. Shortly before sunset, Turner noticed another set of marks, fresh depressions in the soil, barely visible from the ridge, but distinct enough to indicate a path. It was narrow, made by someone crawling rather than walking. Turner traced the line with his eyes. It ran parallel to the ridge for at least 70 meters before disappearing behind a large fallen trunk. He whispered, "Someone moved through here earlier. You think they're setting up for night shots?" Wilkes asked. "Possibly." Japanese snipers avoided night firing unless absolutely necessary, but they sometimes used the late dusk hours for repositioning. Turner kept scanning the area. The depressions were too recent to ignore. Then he saw it, a faint outline, barely distinguishable from the log behind it. The sniper had crawled into a position that gave him a lateral field of fire across the ridge. Not a typical location, but effective. Turner adjusted his angle, steadied his breath, and fired before the figure could fully raise his rifle. A body jerked, rolled once, then lay still. Wilkes counted under his breath. "That's 15 since the ridge fight started." Turner lowered his rifle slowly. "Doesn't matter how many. They'll keep coming." Wilkes looked at him. "You think they're trying to wipe out the observation post?" "No," Turner said. "They want the ridge. They'll pressure it until they decide it's not worth the losses." He didn't add that the battle over the ridge was no longer just a tactical situation. It had become a contest of endurance. One marksman against an enemy determined to reclaim ground through quiet, lethal persistence. As night fell, Turner and Wilkes settled into their rotation. The jungle grew louder, but the ridge stayed tense and alert. Somewhere out there, beyond the tree line, someone else might already be crawling into position. And Turner knew the next series of encounters would determine whether the ridge remained under American control or became another stretch of ground marked by single shots and silent casualties. By the third day of observation duty, the ridge had settled into a pattern that felt both predictable and unstable. Predictable because the environment had rhythms: morning fog, afternoon wind shifts, evening insect surges. Unstable because every hour carried the possibility that a sniper was watching from a place Turner hadn't yet identified. Turner woke before dawn, sliding quietly out of the shallow trench. The jungle was dim, but not fully dark. A faint gray light filtered through the canopy. Wilkes handed him a canteen. "Quiet night," Wilkes whispered. "If someone got close, I didn't hear it." Turner nodded once. He preferred to verify with his own eyes. He scanned the terrain. No new disturbances. No shifted foliage. No broken branches. Still, the sense of calm didn't match the pattern they had seen so far. Turner crouched and began checking the edges of their concealment point. The engineers had packed the dirt tightly, but the surrounding brush could easily give away recent movement if anyone approached. He inspected leaves, soil consistency, and overhanging branches. Everything seemed untouched. Wilkes muttered, "Maybe they pulled back." Turner shook his head. "They don't pull back unless forced." They ate a small breakfast, crackers, canned fruit, and instant coffee heated with a small tablet burner. Turner kept the Winchester across his legs while he ate. The rifle had dried slightly overnight, but moisture still clung inside the forestock. He would need to clean it again later. At 0630, the ridge began to brighten. The visibility increased to about 200 meters, the limit of the thick jungle. Turner lay down in his firing position, adjusting his sight line to cover the same sectors as the days before. For nearly an hour, nothing unusual happened, just shifting light, the low hum of insects, and occasional distant bursts of machine gun fire from American units deeper along the perimeter. Then, at 0740, Turner noticed something unusual. A single branch on the far slope, one that had been angled downward the previous day, now sat slightly higher. Not much, only a few centimeters, but enough to signal that someone had brushed against it while passing. Turner narrowed his focus. He whispered, "Movement on the west slope." Indirect. Wilkes lifted his binoculars. "I see the branch. Nothing else. They're adjusting positions. Probably overnight." Turner shifted the Winchester slowly, careful not to disturb the sandbag under the barrel. For the next 10 minutes, he watched the slope closely. The sniper was skilled if he had moved without leaving obvious signs. The Japanese often used crawling boards, thin planks that distributed weight across damp soil without leaving impressions. Turner had seen similar techniques on Guadalcanal. Suddenly, a faint outline formed near the exposed roots of a split tree trunk. It wasn't a full silhouette, just a slight curve that didn't match the surrounding growth. Turner steadied his breathing. Wilkes whispered, "Distance? 85 meters." Turner waited. The outline shifted slightly, just enough for him to be sure. He fired one clean shot. The figure jerked and collapsed partly behind the roots. Turner held his position. He always expected a second sniper behind the first. Wilkes scanned for movement. No one else. "Not yet," Turner said. They remained silent for another 5 minutes. The area stayed still. Wilkes noted the shot in a small pocket notebook. He kept rough records of the ridge engagements. It wasn't official documentation, just something he did to understand the tempo. The observation hours passed slowly after that. The midday heat pressed down, and the humidity made breathing feel heavier. Turner used the downtime to clean the rifle, running a thin cloth through the barrel and checking the bolt for grit. At 1,400 hours, a low rumble sounded in the distance. Artillery, not American. Japanese forces occasionally fired harassment shells into the perimeter, often with little accuracy. This time, 2 rounds landed in the jungle far from the ridge. Wilkes listened briefly. Their testing range. Turner continued cleaning the Winchester. They're covering movement. Minutes later, Turner froze. A slight flicker of movement appeared in the periphery on the lower eastern slope this time. It was subtle, masked by the angle of the hillside. Turner reached for the Winchester. Wilkes saw it too. East side, just above the fern line. Turner lined up his sights. This sniper was prone, partially beneath a tangle of vines and leaves. Only a small portion of his head and shoulder were visible through gaps. Turner waited for a clearer angle. The sniper didn't move. Turner whispered, "He's watching the main trail below us." "Not us." Wilkes frowned. "Why watch the trail? Maybe another patrol is coming through. He's not here for the ridge." Turner kept his aim steady. The sniper's eyes were fixed downward, not toward Turner's position. The Japanese had anticipated American patrol rotations and placed a shooter exactly where he could strike men crossing into the operational zone. Turner squeezed the trigger. The shot struck cleanly. The sniper fell forward into the ferns. Wilkes exhaled. He wasn't even looking our direction. "They rarely are," Turner said. "They focus on movement, not noise." The afternoon passed without further engagement. The air cooled as the sun dropped behind the trees. By evening, the ridge felt unnervingly quiet. At dusk, Sergeant Moran arrived with 2 men carrying additional supplies. They brought water, extra rations, and a message from Lieutenant Harris. Moran crouched beside Turner. "Command says units reported fewer sniper attacks along the perimeter today. They think yesterday's and today's hits made a difference." Turner simply nodded. Moran continued, "But Division Intel thinks Japanese reinforcements are moving south. That means more activity in your sector. Keep your guard up." Wilkes sighed. "We figure that much." Moran looked directly at Turner. "You doing all right?" "I'm fine." The sergeant studied him for a moment. Turner showed no sign of fatigue, but Moran knew the strain wasn't physical. It was the constant pressure of being the first line against an invisible threat. When Moran left, Turner settled back into position for the last light of day. The ridge was quiet, too quiet compared to the last week. Turner scanned one more time. Then he saw it, a shape standing, not crawling, far off in the tree-line. The silhouette was partially blocked by branches. It wasn't a sniper. It was an officer. Turner's pulse slowed. The Japanese didn't send officers near active sniper positions unless they were evaluating results or preparing new tactics. Wilkes whispered, "You see him?" "Yes." "You gonna take the shot?" "No," Turner said. "He wants us to." The figure disappeared seconds later, melting back into the jungle. Turner stayed still. He knew what this meant. The next day would not be like the others. The Japanese were reassessing the ridge, and their next move would not be a single sniper crawling into place. It would be coordinated. The ridge was no longer just an observation point. It was becoming a target. The ridge was quiet on the morning of July 5th. The humidity was lower than usual, and the sky had a clear gray tone that came before the first heat of the day. Most of the Marines were still waking up, checking their equipment, or boiling whatever water they had left. Elias Turner sat alone behind a fallen tree, working the bolt on his Winchester, checking the chamber, and looking through the scope with deliberate, practiced movements. He hadn't slept more than 2 or 3 hours a night for nearly a week. No one on the ridge had. Japanese snipers were hidden in the trees, the brush, and the rocks beyond the perimeter. They waited for the smallest mistake. A helmet rising above a log. A man walking 20 feet outside the trench line. A brief moment of routine. And every hour or two, another Marine had gone down. That was why Turner was there. Not as a designated sniper, because he wasn't, but because he had a rifle that could reach farther and strike with more precision than anything his platoon carried. Because in the chaos of that ridge, he had become the only man willing and able to push forward through the undergrowth, find the hidden firing positions, and shut them down before they struck again. Moran knelt beside him. "You good?" Turner nodded. His eyes were tired but steady. "How many left?" he asked. "No idea," Moran answered. "But intel says they rotate pairs. So if you got one, there's another somewhere nearby." Turner closed the bolt and slung the rifle. "Then I'll look for the next one." Moran put a hand on his shoulder before he could move. You don't have to keep doing this alone, Turner. I'm the one who can see them, Turner replied. The others don't have scopes. It wasn't bravado. It was a simple fact. The Winchester wasn't powerful, but it was accurate. That was enough to give him an advantage most men didn't have. Wilkes approached from behind, carrying a fresh canteen. Here, he said, drink something. Last thing we need is you passing out with that thing in your hands. Turner drank half. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was water. Behind them, the rest of the platoon watched him prepare to leave again. No one made jokes about the rifle anymore. No one laughed. The same rifle they had mocked for weeks had now taken out 9 hidden snipers, 9 men who would have killed them without hesitation. By the end of the day, the number would become 13. The fourth day, the shadow in the trees. The first target of the day revealed himself with the briefest glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel. Turner was crawling on his stomach through dense ferns, moving an inch at a time when he saw it. A thin, unnatural reflection, 40 yards off the main trail. He stopped breathing, adjusted the scope. The position was concealed behind a cluster of roots, barely anything visible but the shape of a helmet. One shot, a controlled exhale. The helmet shifted. Turner fired. The body fell backward without sound. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even speak. He simply kept crawling. The fifth day, the 2 that almost got him. Later that afternoon, he worked along a narrow ridge spur covered in tangled vines. The air was heavy and still. No wind, no movement. It felt like the jungle was watching him. He picked up a faint trail, broken leaf stems, boot impressions hidden under fresh soil. Japanese snipers rarely moved during the day, but they repositioned after every confirmed kill. Turner followed the sign carefully, checking every shadow, every rise in the ground. A shot cracked, a sharp, violent sound that tore the air. The round hit the dirt 6 inches from his left hand. Turner rolled, slid behind a thick root, and brought the scope up immediately. He scanned slowly. Nothing. Then he noticed a small depression on a slope above him. The edge of a camouflage sheet moved slightly. He fired once. A shout followed, short, surprised. The sniper slumped sideways. But Turner didn't relax. Where there was one, there was usually another. He stayed still, breathing slowly, letting the jungle settle. A minute passed, then another. A second muzzle flash sparked from the far side of a fallen log. Turner dropped flat. The bullet passed overhead. He pivoted the rifle, exhaled, and took the shot. The second sniper fell forward, rolling halfway down the slope. He waited another 10 minutes before moving again. When he returned to the platoon, Wilkes met him halfway. That 3 today? Turner nodded. Then that makes 12, Wilkes said quietly. Moran added, there's one more. Somewhere near the far ridge line. Turner didn't hesitate. I'll find him. The 13th. The last sniper had taken a position on a narrow overlook facing the Marine perimeter. He had already killed 2 men that morning. The platoon had tried smoke grenades, suppressive fire, and flanking attempts. None of it worked. Turner crawled for nearly an hour to get into position. He moved through mud, over sharp roots, and under dense layers of vines that clung to his uniform. His arms shook with fatigue. His eyes burned from sweat. But he kept going. When he finally reached a low ridge with a clear view, he stopped. There, 50 yards away, the sniper was perched in a tree hollow, the barrel barely visible. Turner steadied the rifle. He waited for the sniper to shift his weight. A slight movement. That was enough. He fired. The Japanese marksman fell instantly, dropping from the hollow and landing on the sloped ground below. Turner exhaled hard and lowered the rifle. The ridge was quiet, for the first time in 5 days. After the silence, Turner walked back into camp, carrying his Winchester low at his side. The men didn't cheer. They didn't rush him. They simply stood and watched him pass, understanding what he had done for them, and how close they had all come to sharing the same fate as the men lost earlier in the week. Moran approached first. That the last of them? Yes, Turner said. You did good, Moran replied. It was the only praise the sergeant ever gave him. Wilkes clapped a hand on Turner's back. You know, he said quietly, nobody's laughing about that rifle anymore. Turner sat down on a crate outside the command tent. He unloaded the Winchester, wiped the barrel with a cloth, and rested it across his knees. He didn't smile. He didn't boast. He was too tired, too drained, too aware of what each of those 13 shots meant. None of the men forgot those days. Not because of the number of kills, but because of what it took to survive. Precision, patience, determination, and a rifle that everyone had dismissed until it proved itself under the harshest possible conditions. The mail-order rifle had done what few believed it could. 13 snipers, 5 days, one Marine with a clear view and a steady hand. Closing reflection. When the war moved on and the ridge became just another place on the map, the events of those 5 days remained in the memories of the men who lived through them. The Winchester never appeared in official records. Turner's actions were never written into any briefings or battlefield reports. But the platoon remembered. History rarely records small stories like this. Moments when survival depended not on strategy or orders, but on the judgment and resolve of individual soldiers. Turner wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't look for the role he ended up filling. He was simply a young man with a tool he trusted and the discipline to use it when it mattered most. And on that ridge, during those 5 days, that was enough to save dozens of lives.